Post Road. Shoreline Rail and Recycling, LLC is the applicant. Old Post Road Realty is the owner. It's a regulated activity within 50 feet of inland wetlands. Replace 186,000 square foot building, demolished in storm with new 94,500 square foot structure, and outside storage of materials on an existing concrete pad. Assessors map 77, block 59, lot 1A, zone I2. This is a continuance from the March 6, 2018 public hearing. So, folks, we do have, actually I'd be very interested, were many of you here last month? Yes. Large number, some first time here for some folks? All right, thank you for that. What we do have is a sign-up sheet down, is it down there? All right, there is a sign-up sheet down there if anyone wishes to speak when we get to the public comment portion. I do want to run through a few items before we get into the public hearing. First and foremost, I do want to remind everyone to be respectful, and if you do choose to speak, please focus your comments. This is especially true for the folks who are new here this evening. Focus your comments on the potential for impact to inland wetlands and water courses, which is, that's really our jurisdictional area. We look solely at impacts to inland wetlands and whether those impacts are going to be temporary or permanent, and whether they can be, hopefully as you saw with the last application, whether we can minimize or mitigate some of those impacts. Right? We're going to begin by reading the public notice, the continued public hearing into the record, and we'll probably have some questions for the applicant. They may, I don't know, are you guys going to do any presentation this evening? What do you plan? So they'll probably do a little bit of presentation. Then we'll move into the public comment portion. We'll start with those folks who are in favor of the application, followed by those who are opposed, and then folks with just general comments. And again, as last month, we do reserve the right to limit the time for each speaker if it becomes necessary. We did not have to last time, but as with last month, we need to be out of here by 9:30. So that's really the clock we're running up against. If we need to, we can continue the public hearing again, but we do need to be out of here. So again, if you choose to comment, we're going to ask you to come forward to a microphone. I think we have two. State your name and address for the record. Direct your comments to the commission. Be concise and make them, again, pertinent to our regulations and area of jurisdiction. Okay? Scott is the secretary. So we will read the public notice. We have a public notice. Oh, I'm sorry. IWC 17-012R, 30 Old Post Road, Shoreline Rail and Recycling, LLC, applicant, Old Post Road Realty owner. Regulated activity within 50 feet of inland wetlands. Replace 186,000 square foot building demolished in storm with new 94,500 square foot structure and outside storage of materials on an existing concrete pad. Assessors map 77, block 59, lot 1-A, zone I2. At said hearing, all persons will have the right to be heard and written communication received. The applications and accompanying maps are available for public inspection in the Land Use Office of the Town Hall. Dated at Clinton, Connecticut, the 7th day of March, 2018, David Rackett, Chair, Clinton, IWC. Emailed to the Harbor News to be published on Thursday, March 22nd, 2018, and Thursday, March 29th, 2018. Yeah, before we get into that, actually, Chris, Carl, you guys were not here. Chris, I know you were on vacation. Last month, we did ask members to affirm that they were comfortable participating in this application or in the public hearing, that they were approaching the application with an open mind. They had no conflict or predisposition and anything that would disqualify them from participating, and everyone here affirmed that. Since you guys weren't here, I'm just looking to make sure that you're also comfortable participating. Yep, Carl, comfortable participating? You have no conflict or anything? No. So Carl, we're just looking to affirm that you have no conflict or anything that would cause you to need to recuse yourself from this. You're comfortable participating?
I have no problem.
All right, thank you, Carl. All right, so now we have the list of correspondence. Just the list.
This is the list of documents received from March 6, 2018 through April 2nd, 2018. All documents are in file in the Land Use Office. March 6, 2018, letter from DTC, need more time for review. March 9th, 2018, email from Guarneri, in opposition. March 13th, 2018, letter from Blondin, inquiries. March 19th, 2018, letter from Luriero, response to March 6, 2018, public hearing comments. March 20th, 2018, letter from Luriero. March 20th, staff review comments, 5 comments. March 20th, 2018, letter from Bergman, in opposition. March 21st, 2018, letter from Bennett. Inventor, not a valid petition to intervene. Intervener, not a valid petition to intervene. March 26, 2018, email from Zamachek, information and concerns. March 27, 2018, letter from DTC, engineering review update. March 27, 2018, email from Cider, in opposition. And April 2nd, 2018, letter from Snarsky, environmental project review. Would anyone wish to have a document from the document list read into the record?
There is a request.
There's a request from Kathy Zmenchik. Could you please read it? Is Kathy here? Okay. I guess when she emailed it, she did ask for this to be read into the meeting. So it's this.
Dear Commission members, I am commenting on behalf of myself as a citizen and as the chair of the Clinton Conservation Commission. I do not represent the Commission on this issue of the recycling facility. I have no objections to this type of facility in our town. It is the conditions of the location that I have concerns with. I am concerned about the 5-foot distance to the wetlands. There have been many applications in the past that were further away and less threatening to the wetlands than this, and they have been denied. This location is in the 100-year flood zone, which is happening with more frequency and will continue to do so over the next few decades. There will be some debris around the facility no matter how well it is maintained. 5 feet is extremely close, and it will be very difficult to prevent some of the materials from straying into the wetlands. Rain and floods will eventually carry many of these materials throughout the adjacent wetland area and downriver. But there is also something else important to this wetland area. It is an area of salt marsh advancement. As sea level rises, our salt marshes will be flooded over, and the salt marsh conditions will advance inland into some areas of inland wetlands. I have provided the link for the extensive study done a few years ago by the Nature Conservatory titled A Salt Marsh Advancement Zone Assessment of Clinton. This study shows open space parcels, protected and unprotected, that are critical to the conservation of salt marsh advancement corridors. These areas are along the Clinton shoreline where the salt marshes will need to advance in order to preserve the many species that rely on the narrow area of sea salt marshes along the coastline. As can be seen from the map that I have included, the location of this property and the adjacent wetlands, which is shown on block B3, is one of the biggest and most critical areas to which the salt marsh will advance. It also shows that the structure will eventually be completely surrounded by the advancing salt marsh. It's my opinion that regardless of the condition of that wetland area at this time, it needs to be preserved and protected so that it will be a suitable location for our salt marsh species when there's little place else left for them to thrive. This is projected to be a few decades away, but the predictions of the impacts of sea level rise are evolving, and we must take these predictions into consideration if we were to truly protect our shoreline from irreversible damage. Over the years, wetland regulations have changed because our knowledge of the importance has increased, and we have a responsibility to use that knowledge to plan the future of development of our shoreline town. As someone who has worked for many years on the Clinton Inland Wetlands Commission and the Conservation Commission to protect the environment of our town, it is my opinion that what happens to this property can impact the future of our shoreline environment, and therefore I believe this location is very unsuitable for this recycling facility. I am hoping that the Commission will take these concerns into consideration when making the final decision. From what I have learned from all the available information, my recommendation is that this application should be denied and not be reconsidered under any circumstances. Thank you for your attention to this issue. Catherine Zeminchik.
All right, now you made me admonish you again. No, seriously, when anyone speaks or anything, if you agree with it or disagree, just please try really hard to refrain from clapping or, yes, you got it, you can do that all you want. Just don't clap or make noise. Anything audible is verboten, okay? Thank you. There are two things I would like to read into the record, two which are fairly new. It's a letter from Rich Snarsky dated April 2nd, 2018. It would be, and the DTC letter of March 27th, that's one of them, yep. Yeah, it's the one received April 3rd. It's in the packet. It was superseded by one April 3rd. I can give you my copy. And you can both of them, please, Scott, and you can just paraphrase some of the preamble. Thank you.
Dated March 27, 2018, subject 30 Oak Post Road, Inland Wetlands application IWC 17-012R. Dear Mr. Knapp, as requested, we have completed our review of the revised plans and comment responses provided for the above referenced application. Based on this review and following the numbering convention from our January 5th, 2018 letter, we offer the following. Number one, we appreciate the developer's engineer's comment responses and believe that the plan revisions are an improvement over the initial submission. The elimination of the outside storage area reduces the potential for continuous washing of the outside stockpiled materials during rain events and the need for a robust screening system for stormwater runoff from this pile. Number two, the developer's engineer has provided a detailed breakdown of the anticipated makeup of the construction debris that they'll be handling at the site. Moving the stockpiled materials indoors also alleviates many of our concerns over stormwater impacts from this material on the surrounding wetlands. The land tech study is an important addition to the application record as well. We remain concerned over the actual composition of the waste material being processed. Although most of the materials will likely be standard demolition debris, the developer's engineer states that other household or business items can also be mixed in with the loads, including furniture, appliances, electronics, tires, and other items. Since the waste processor does not appear to have any direct control over the composition of the waste material he is receiving, it seems likely that objectionable materials such as waste oils, paints, leads, asbestos-containing materials, or other heavy metals, etc., will make their way into the processing facility. Since this is a mixed-use waste stream, we assume that these materials will also arrive uncontained, intermingled with, and possibly absorbed by the construction waste. We also assume that the materials have been stockpiled outside at various construction sites and will be transported in open trucks. Our concern in this regard is that the material arriving will likely have some level of liquid components, oils, rainwater soaked materials, etc., that will likely have some level of liquid that will need to be addressed after they are dumped on the building floor for sorting. Some measure of the internal leachate isolation, collection, and treatment will also need to be provided in the design to prevent these materials from draining from the building into the surrounding environment. In an ideal case, this leachate would need to be pre-treated and discharged to a sanitary sewer. However, the unavailability of municipal sewers at this location makes treatment and disposal of this leachate more complicated. The developer must provide a clear plan for how liquid waste will be managed on a day-to-day basis and how he will ensure that these wastes will be prevented from leaving the building. This would also apply to any maintenance operations within the building involving cleaning solvents or water. It also might be helpful if the developer can provide a copy of the application that they have made to the CTDEP for authorization of the proposed solid waste facility. This application may contain additional information not clearly articulated in the application materials submitted to the town. Number 3, we appreciate the developer engineer's efforts to address retention and screening of debris using removable mesh screens. We, however, remain concerned over the ability of these screens to effectively remove debris from receding floodwaters. These screens will need to be fully sealed against the door jambs and floor and will need to be strong and resilient enough to hold up as floodwaters leave the building. Contaminants such as oils or fine dust would likely not be effectively screened by the proposed geotextile layer. A failure of these systems would have catastrophic consequences on downstream wetland resources, requiring extensive cleanup that could stretch for long distances downstream. Costs for such cleanup could exceed the ability of the facility to sustain. Location of a facility such as this in an area not subjected to flooding will eliminate these concerns in their entirety. Comment 4, the developer's engineer stated that they will work closely with the local health district in testing of the existing system and have committed to replacing the system if necessary. In the end, the operation of this facility is at least as important as the initial design in terms of long-term protection to the environment. The location of this facility near inland and possible tidal wetlands and within a FEMA-designated floodplain only serve to magnify the critical need for highly effective best management practices in the facility's day-to-day operations. A similar facility in a location where these critical environmental constraints would have a greater margin of error and possibly less overall concerns over potential operational issues. Please review the above comments with the board and contact the undersigned if you have any questions. Sincerely, J. Andrew Bellavacqua, PE, ETC. Dated April 2nd, 2018. Dear Mr. Radka, Eric Knapp requested I review the proposed Shoreline Rail and Recycling LLC for wetland impacts. I have reviewed the following information on the subject of the project. There's 7 items that they reviewed. I conducted a site investigation of the wetlands on site and the wetlands off site in the vicinity of the subject land on March 28, 2018. I offer the following comments. Number 1, I concur with Mr. Christopher Allen, Land Tech, wetlands functions and value evaluation of the 5 wetlands he evaluated. Mr. Allen states that the intermittent watercourse is regulated as an inland watercourse and not a tidal watercourse, even though the watercourse channel is below the 3.4-foot coastal jurisdiction line elevation. The intermittent watercourse discharges to a culvert under the railroad tracks. The invert of the culvert is at elevation 1.2 feet, which is 2.2 feet below the coastal jurisdiction line elevation of 3.4 feet. During my field investigation, I observed minnows on both sides of the railroad culvert. Broad-leaved cattails and breaching burrid are growing in the intermittent watercourse. Both of these plant species are listed as freshwater tidal wetland plants. State Statute Section 22A-29. Wetland number 4 may also be a tidal wetland. I recommend that the detailed elevations be taken in the channel of the intermittent watercourse and wetland number 4 in order to determine an inland watercourse from a tidal watercourse. Comment number 2, no filling of the wetlands or watercourses proposed in the redevelopment of the land and no clearing of natural woodland areas will occur. Thus, there is not to be a direct impact to the wetlands and wetland buffers. Comment 3. I believe the main wetland-related issue is stormwater runoff to the intermittent watercourse and down gradient wetlands. Hydrodynamic separators are considered a secondary treatment practice. They are typically used as pre-treatment practice located upstream of a primary stormwater treatment practice. This practice removes sediment along with oils and grease, but is ineffective for removal of dissolved pollutants. Therefore, utilization of a primary stormwater treatment practice is warranted and recommended because of the intended use of the site. According to the 2004 Stormwater Quality Manual, primary stormwater treatment practices are capable of providing high levels of water quality treatment and capture and treat the water quality volume or water quality flow, remove at least 80% of the average annual total suspended solid load, and at least 80% of the flowable debris, including petroleum products, and perform acceptably and continue to provide long-term treatment. Examples of primary stormwater treatment practices include stormwater ponds, which are wet ponds, micropool extended detention pond, wet extended detention pond, and multiple pond systems, stormwater wetlands, shallow wetland, extended detention wetland, and pond wetland system, infiltration practices, infiltration trench or infiltration basin, filtering practices, surface sand filter, underground sand filter, perimeter and sand filter, and bioretention, and water quality swales, either dry or wet swale. Given the relatively shallow depth to groundwater, a stormwater wetland may be the best primary treatment option. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. Yours truly, New England Environmental Services, Richard Snarsky.
Thanks, Scott. We have some more. This is from the Connecticut Department of Agriculture. Addressed to you there. This just came in? 4:30 this evening. Okay. All of it? Read all of it? We haven't seen it yet. You just got it. Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Microphone.
Dear Mr. Knapp, the Connecticut Department of Agriculture has been requested by stakeholders to provide an opinion regarding the permitting of a new solid waste facility in the town of Clinton at 30 Old Post Road in Clinton in light of potential impacts to shellfish resources managed by the town of Clinton and commercial shellfish harvesters. Sections 26-192A and 26-192E, paragraphs A and C of the Connecticut General Statutes establish that the Connecticut Department of Agriculture Bureau of Agriculture as the lead agency on shellfish in the Connecticut. The DOAG uses the guidelines and standards set forth by the National Shellfish Sanitation Program to classify Connecticut's shellfish growing areas. The NSSP is a federal state cooperative program recognized by the United States Food and Drug Administration and the Interstate Shellfish Sanitation Conference for the sanitary control of shellfish produced and sold for human consumption. Shellfish are filter-feeding organisms that pump large quantities of seawater through their bodies as part of the normal feeding process. As a result, any contamination of the growing waters can become concentrated in shellfish meats by as much as 100 times that found in the water column. In order to ensure the safety of shellfish for human consumption, shellfish growing areas are classified based on the potential of contamination, in addition to the evidence of actual contamination. Growing area classifications are based on the evidence of contamination found throughout the sanitary survey and are reevaluated on an annual basis. The sanitary survey includes the identification of actual and potential sources of pollution that may adversely impact the growing area, an evaluation of meteorological and hydrographic factors, and an assessment of water quality. The sanitary survey demonstrates conformance to NSSP model ordinance, bacteriological criteria, and the absence of dangerous levels of poisonous and deleterious substances. The authority is required to provide documentation to the US FDA on an annual basis of any new pollution sources and must evaluate their effort on the growing area. A Department of Engineering Environmental Protection Permit application has been submitted by Shoreline Rail and Recycling for an individual solid waste facility and is currently under review by the permitting agency. A volume reduction and transfer station operation is being proposed at the facility. These facilities involve the processing of construction and demolition waste, scrap materials, scrap metals, municipal solid waste, and clean wood. The potential for shellfish classification impacts are difficult to anticipate since the permitting of this facility is still under consideration at both the local and state level, and there are many unknowns associated with the project. While it is unlikely that the facility operating within the normal parameters of its DEP permits will contaminate shellfish beds downstream, in situations such as a flooding event, fire, or other catastrophic failure at the facility, particulates associated with solid waste at the site may be released into the watershed. Shellfish in their role as filter feeders will concentrate these contaminants, and depending on the nature of the chemicals, shellfish tissue may remain contaminated for an extended period of time. A significant investment has been made by the town of Clinton and Indian River shellfish to restore oyster populations in the Hammock River in recent years. The Department of Agriculture does not believe that a facility such as is proposed in a location adjacent to the wetlands has the potential to unpredictably contaminate the shellfish growing area downstream in the Hammock River. According to the NSSP Section 3, Chapter 2, presence of toxic substances in shellfish meats. Because shellfish are filter feeders, they can readily accumulate substances from the water column. The types of poisonous and deleterious substances that have been recovered from shellfish include heavy metals, pesticides, petroleum products, polychlorinated bifuels, and naturally occurring marine biotoxins. The source of these contaminants may be industrial, agricultural, mining, spillage, sewer, dredging operations, sludge dumps, and naturally occurring toxigenic marine organisms. The FDA has established action levels, tolerances, and guidance levels for poisonous and deleterious substances to control the levels of contaminants in human food, including seafood, FDA Federal Register 1977, FDA 2002. Action levels are established and revised according to criteria specified in the Code of Federal Regulations and are revoked when a regulation establishing a tolerance for the same substance and use becomes effective. Action levels and tolerances represent limits at or above which FDA will take legal action to remove adulterated products, including shellfish, from the market. Action levels and tolerances are established based on the unavoidability of the poisonous or deleterious substances and do not represent permissible levels of contamination where it is avoidable. Guidance levels are used to assess public health impact at the specified contaminant. And from NSSP Section 2, Chapter 2, presence of toxic substances in shellfish meats. A, upon a determination that toxic substances, including heavy metals, chlorinated hydrocarbons, and natural toxins are present in the levels of public health significance in shellfish meats, the authority shall investigate the harvesting, distribution, and processing of shellfish and take necessary action in accordance with the procedures described in Section 4. B, when a growing area continues to demonstrate the presence of toxic substances in the absence of illness, the authority shall perform a risk assessment to determine the correct classification of the area. According to the NSSP Section 2, Chapter 4, Growing Areas, E, prohibited classifications. An area shall be classified as prohibited if a sanitary survey determines The growing area is adjacent to a sewage treatment plant outfall or other point source outfall with public health significance. Pollution sources may be unpredictably contaminated the growing area, or the area is contaminated with poisonous or deleterious substances causing the shellfish to be adulterated. The prohibited classification requires that the authority not permit the harvest of shellfish from any area classified as prohibited, except for the harvest of shell stock for the gathering of seed and aquaculture for the depletion of the areas classified as prohibited. In addition to the federal requirements for management and classifications for shellfish, growing areas contaminated by deleterious substances, the Connecticut State General Statutes also require that Chapter 491, State Shell Fisheries, Section 26-192E, classification of coastal waters, shores, and tidal flats for the taking of shellfish. A, the Department of Agriculture may prohibit the taking of harvesting of shellfish from the designated area and tidal flats, shores, and coastal waters whenever it finds that examinations or surveys that such flats, shores, or coastal waters are contaminated or polluted to the extent of the waters, or polluted to the extent that the waters do not meet standards of purity established by said department, in conjunction with the Department of Public Health, or that shellfish obtained therefrom may be unfit for food or dangerous to the public health. The Department of Agriculture is recommending that the following actions be taken to inform shellfish resource management based on our understanding of the project at this time. Background sampling of oysters located in the Hammock River should be conducted. The sampling and analysis should be arranged with the Department of Agriculture. Background sampling would allow the department to determine the impact of a contamination event and would serve as a known baseline level for contamination in shellfish tissue following a failure event. The existing shellfish classification in the Hammock River shall remain in effect until the facility has obtained all required local approvals and DEP permits. Once the facility has been permitted by the Town of Clinton and the CTDEP, the Department of Agriculture will review all permits and reassess the classification of the Hammock River. A potential outcome of this assessment is the downgrade of the Hammock River and/or adjacent waters to a prohibited classification, which would require that only seed oysters, with juvenile oysters less than 2 inches in length, be legally harvested from the river. In order to protect public health from the injuries associated with the consumption of contaminated shellfish, emergency conditions that result in the release of contamination from any facility may result in the extended and in some cases permanent closure of shellfish beds. These closure events may result in the loss of significant commercial, municipal, and state revenue. The department hopes that this information helps to inform shellfish stakeholders of the potential shellfish resources impacted associated with this type of operation. However, the department does not have the ability to comment more specifically on this project at this stage of the permitting process. Sincerely, Kristen DeRosa Bannock, State of Connecticut Department of Agriculture.
All right, Scott earned his salary tonight. Thank you, Scott. We do have one. Are there any other documents anyone wish to be read into the record? No? The only additional item I would note that we received this evening was a verified pleading. I'm not sure what we'd call it, but there was the interveners had filed a verified pleading last month, and the town attorney pointed out that it really technically needed to be done under oath. That's been complied with, so I guess you're now a verified pleader, intervener? Okay. Do we have a copy of that? Thank you. So if there are no other documents to be read into the record, I guess the applicant, obviously things have changed since last month. Removal of the exterior stockpile, for example. So do you have a presentation that you'd like to show? An updated, okay. And if you could, the routine, name, affiliation, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, thank you. My name is George Andrews. I'm with Lorero Engineering Associates. We're out of Plainville, Connecticut. I'm a licensed professional engineer, a licensed environmental professional. Been practicing engineering since 1986. My specialty is solid waste management and solid waste permitting. Here tonight to speak on behalf of Shoreline Rail and Recycling. And I'd like to just give you a quick agenda. I was pleased that you read a couple of the documents into the record. That will save me, and I'll just kind of paraphrase through those and provide some of our responses to those. So, quick agenda. Just starting with the site. I think there's a pointer on there too. This is the site right here. This is the rail line. And this is Old Post Road. Just to refresh everyone.
Mr. Andrew, just for, especially for Chris and Carl's benefit, since they weren't here last, if you could also point it out on the flip chart, since we can't see what you're, thank you.
Yep. So the rail line is located right here, Amtrak. This is the subject parcel, limits of the subject parcel. And this is Old Post Road. I'll try to go back into order. Sometimes I forget. Please just remind me.
Thank you.
What I'd like to talk about tonight is run through the proposed site plan changes. As you mentioned, we have made some changes to the plan set in accordance with some of the comments that we heard. We'd like to run through the response to comments from Trinkus Engineering, also DTC, as well as New England Environmental Services, Rich Snarsky. And as I say, I'll be able to paraphrase some of the comments and then run through our responses. I'll close out with some closing remarks and then turn the floor over to Chris Allen to discuss the wetland and watercourse evaluation report that he prepared and we submitted. So in summary, the proposed site plan changes. Essentially, you spoke and we listened to many of your comments. Several comments were made regarding the aggregate stockpile. And for those that aren't familiar with the application, the aggregate stockpile was proposed right in that location. Right in this location for those at the counter. We eliminated the aggregate stockpile completely, and from the slab, we'll be locating a minor amount of soil material inside the building structure. There were a couple of comments with regard to windblown material. There was one gentleman that spoke to me after the hearing, and also several with regard to flooding conditions in the recession of the floodwaters and the potential dispersion of material as a result of that into the wetlands. So we're proposing to provide a full height screen. So this is a plan detail of our screen. And we would be providing this screen over each one of the doorway access points. And we'd have a 4-foot lower section would be galvanized essentially with a non-woven geotextile material.
Mr. Andrew, sorry to interrupt. Could you, when you flip the page, could you just for the record, tell us what sheet that is so we've got it in the record? Thank you.
That's sheet number 12 at 13.
12, thank you.
Yeah. Right, there's actually been a screen that was installed prior to the initiation of the cleanup of the building, and that's been retained at the site. So there is an existing screen that currently exists. It's approximately 15 feet high or so, and what we're proposing is a little bit more intense. The mesh size is much smaller, and then as I mentioned, the lower section would be provided with non-woven geotextile as well. There was a comment that was received with regard to primary treatment of stormwater. We're quite limited on the site as both of our discharges go essentially into the Amtrak right-of-way. So there's not an awful lot that we're able to do on the far end of the discharge. We did are proposing to make an amendment to the plan. We just got those comments yesterday and haven't had a chance to make those changes to the plans. but we are proposing to add a water quality swale along the eastern portion of the site to just further enhance water quality. Further, the Inland Wetlands and Watercourse Chair asked for us to prepare a wetland and watercourse evaluation report, which we did. As I mentioned, Chris Allen will be presenting that after I button things up. And just wanted to call attention to a couple of letters from the town, March 20, March 5, and January 10, which are comments with regard to our application, all letters of which indicated that the particular section that requires this in your wetlands regulations did not apply since it was not a significant activity. That determination was made at the initial wetlands meeting when I presented to you. So we went ahead and obviously you requested the additional information, so we went forward with that. I'll try to abbreviate this quite a bit. There were 30 comments here from Trinkus, and several of them apply to the aggregate stockpile. I'll skip over those. We've eliminated the aggregate stockpile from the proposal, and that'll cut out about 10 items. So I'll move right to item number 2, the first one related to an aggregate stockpile. Item number 2, and once again I'll paraphrase, project narrative only talks in generic terms about the type of material and the amount of material to be brought to the site. No detailed description. We did, as a response to that, provide a detailed package, and it's consistent with our solid waste management application that's in front of DDEP. Question number 3 looks like the same question, just reworded, same response to that. Question 4, the project narrative seems to imply that the rail spur would be used for the delivery of material to the site. That's not correct. We wouldn't anticipate delivery of any materials. The delivery we're anticipating will be all trucks, and rail will be essentially exiting the site with materials. Item 5, the narrative further states the facility will remove over 100 trucks a day from the Route 95 corridor. There's no evidence to support this. It's a little detailed. I'll run through the math very quickly for you. But we're looking at our objective at full build out is to run 2,500 tons per day through the facility. We'll be recycling 45% of that. 50% of the recycled materials will be shipped by rail. The remainder of the waste, 1,125 tons, would be shipped as C&DD. So essentially we come up with 1,937 tons that would be shipped by rail on a daily basis at full capacity and at full recycle, which is 97 trucks. Item 6, there's no information as to where the material will be coming from, how long the material would be on site, and where it will go after processing. We agree and didn't feel that that was privy to Inland Wetlands application. Item 7, with increased deliveries by truck, it'll be significantly increase the pollutant loads on the site, particularly metals, total petroleum hydrocarbons, which will wind up in the stormwater. Once again, I wanted to just call attention to the fact that we are proposing to enhance the stormwater quality with 2 hydrodynamic separators as well as a primary treatment system. And once again, we're proposing to reoccupy an existing warehouse facility. So there was a 186,000 square foot building there. Deliveries came into that facility, deliveries left from that facility. There was truck traffic. I don't have counts to match up, but we're using the site essentially very similar to the way it was initially used. We're processing all indoors. We're not storing outdoors at this particular point. As currently proposed, there will be substantially higher pollutant loads generated from the site as a result of the following: increased number of trips of large dump trucks in and out of the site, and stockpile and processing of debris. So once again, we've eliminated the storage of the material that was proposed on the slab. And as I said earlier, I would assert that the facility was once used by trucks, once visited by trucks, and I don't see that the trucking load and the pollutant load from the trucks coming in and out would be a significant change. The application does not list the proposed stormwater management improvements shown on the plans, and that was actually detailed in the drainage report, which was submitted with our application. Dave Lord delineated the wetlands in the eastern portion of the site according to mapping, but it appears he did not delineate the wetland between the parking and the rail. That's correct, and Chris Allen will be presenting on that. Chris Allen actually flagged that for us. Number 11, there is no environmental assessment as required in Section 7.4 of the Clinton Inland Wetlands Regulations. I agree, and that was specifically not required per the town's letters. Number 12, the narrative states that the existing sewage disposal system is adequate for the project. This falls under Section B100 of the Health Code. There's a variety of things that you typically do for a new or repair of an existing septic system that are listed in the comment here. We're reusing an existing septic system. We're not proposing a new system, and we're not proposing to repair the system. We're going to use what's there. Consequently, no test pits. Perk tests are necessary. The next question relates similarly to what's called the minimum leaching system spread. That applies to a new system and or a repair system, and we're not proposing new or repair. 14 through 18 are all aggregate related, so I'll skip over those. Number 19, the applicant proposes to install 2 hydrodynamic separators on the existing drainage pipes. As proposed, the removal efficiency of the hydrodynamic separators will be significantly reduced and will not achieve the Connecticut DEP goal of 80% removal of TSS. We submitted in our drainage report originally 80% figure and attached documentation to that was provided by the manufacturer of the facility. To further bolster that position, we did get back in touch with Contact and asked them for some further information. They provided us with the full study documenting the adequacy of that system and documenting the removal efficiency, and that was provided as part of this response. Question 20 appears to be a duplicate of 19. 21, hydrodynamic separators are not suitable for the removal of nutrients as well as soluble pollutants. Once again, we're proposing all of our activities essentially indoors, so we aren't necessarily concerned with enhancing the nutrient load to the stormwater on the site. Everything will be done indoors. 22, there are no calculations of the water quality volume per the Connecticut DEP 2004 Stormwater Quality Manual. The water quality volume was attached to this. It was indeed calculated, and it was used as a basis for sizing of our hydrodynamic separators, and we provided that calculation for your review. Number 23, stormwater management system will be discharging into existing wetland systems located between the concrete slab and rail spur, runoff from the wetland boundaries. As proposed, the design will cause adverse environmental impacts to the inland wetlands. As I mentioned, we look at the use of the site as very similar. We have truck traffic coming in, truck traffic going out. Our activities are proposed under a roof within the building. The prior activities included truck traffic in and out and included storage of a variety of different chemicals and products within the floodplain under a roof from within the building. So consequently, we do not see a significant impact or increase in contamination to the inland wetlands. There is no evaluation which factually demonstrates non-point source pollutants loads will be sufficiently reduced so as not to have adverse impacts on the receiving inland wetland systems. Once again, I go back to the fact that all our processing is going to be done indoors. And there's a reason that we picked indoors. We could have proposed it on an open slab like many of the transfer facilities, and we actually chose to go indoors to minimize stormwater contact specifically. We believe this to be the first of its kind where all activities except for weighing will be performed indoors. The entire building, large parking area, truck scales are within the 100-year floodplain according to the current FEMA mapping. It goes on to talk a little bit about the elevations, and we know that. We agree and confirm that. It stated that there will be a net increase in flood storage volume, 298 yards of fill. We provided calculations documenting that. Apparently they were looking for calculations to support that. We provided that. There's also no analysis showing what the effect of the minor increase in flood storage would be on the current FEMA flood elevation. Our effort in reducing the amount or increasing the amount of flood storage was certainly not to have an impact on the elevation 12. It's a very, very minor amount. It's immeasurable in the grand scheme of a 100-year flood event. We're just looking to ensure that we were below, that we were actually providing more flood storage than what we started with, so that we wouldn't be challenged on reducing flood storage. Number 28 and 29, I'll combine my response to that. Submitted stormwater reports, it states that the existing swale will provide detention of stormwater, and goes on to talk a little bit about the swale. As I mentioned, we're proposing to enhance that swale, and we would be providing a water quality swale, a wet water quality swale at that location, which will further enhance. That's a primary practice, stormwater treatment practice, and that enhancement would be provided on an updated plan. The next two items, 30 and 31, were duplicates. We referred the reader up to question number 24 and question number 8, and that concludes our response to the Trinkus comments. Just wanted to go over the attachments that we included with our response. Wetland and water course evaluation report, you'll hear more about that in a moment. The contact field verification reports, the water quality volume calculations, the material and storage volumes, and the flood storage analysis. I'd like to move at this point over to the DTC comments. I'll paraphrase just so everyone can recollect what the question was, and then provide our response. So the first was a concern related to liquid materials making their way into the tipping floor. There was a recommendation for a leachate collection system within the building structure. The operator that will be operating this particular facility has over 30 years of experience in operating these and has never had floor drains or leachate issues within a tipping floor. And what the most important emphasis that I can provide is that if you deliver a wet load, you'd be paying perhaps twice as much because you're paying for the water and the load. So most contractors are very savvy of that, and they're sure to provide dry loads. We're actually not going to be permitted to accept wet loads, and it wouldn't be permitted to be tipped on the tipping floor. So with all of that in mind, we are not proposing any changes to the plans to include a leachate collection system, as we have bigger concerns with regard to plugging the system with the material that we're working on the floor. There was a request for a copy of the solid waste application that was provided to the town on June 23rd, 2017. There was a concern regarding the screen that we're proposing, this screen right here, with the ability for that screen to retain oils and dust. We proposed essentially a double screen for the lower section, specifically so that we would retain as much dust and material as we possibly could. So once again, I have a non-woven geotextile that's backed up by a 1-inch mesh screen behind it. The upper section would be provided with a full mesh screen all the way up to the full height of the door. And that would be provided essentially to retain flying debris from a heavy wind occurrence. DTC acknowledged the developer will work with the health department on a subsurface sewage disposal system. And then, last but not least, was a concern regarding the location of the facility in the FEMA floodplain. In our previous response to comments, we prepared a flood management plan that included gating at all the building points. It has provisions for upland storage of vehicles, removal or lofting of all liquid storage within the building, screening for air and waterborne materials, and it has procedures and mechanisms in place to mitigate the potential impacts. We typically have forecast of significant flooding events and would have adequate time to respond and implement that flood management plan. And we're comfortable that that's satisfactory. Next is response to comments from New England Environmental Services. Once again, I'll paraphrase. Concern regarding the potential differentiation between inland wetland and tidal delineations. I'll let Chris tackle that. I will just assert that we wouldn't change anything in our application as a result of that. Whether it's tidal or whether it's freshwater, the protections that we're providing are suitable for both. Rich acknowledged no direct impact on the wetlands from filling or cutting. Rich also expressed concern regarding stormwater quality and the use of secondary treatment practices. As I mentioned, we're proposing, in light of Rich's comments and in respect for his opinion, we'll provide a wet swale to be located on the eastern discharge. The western discharge is below a parking lot, so I just don't have any room to add anything at that particular location. We do have, as I say, hydrodynamic separators on both of those, and we are enhancing the stormwater quality as a result of the improvements that we're proposing on the site. Closing remarks, I'd just like to hit on a couple of items. So we eliminated the exterior stockpile. We've enhanced the building containment systems. We've added primary treatment practice to one of the two discharges, coupled with the two hydrodynamic separators. We prepared a wetland and watercourse evaluation report, submitted that to you. And a couple of last minute comments. This is a construction and demolition debris processing facility. So there's a lot of talk of other materials and other products that would be received, and we have provision for those materials in our DEEP application as a reason for that. They're not permitted to come in as construction and demolition debris. They do find some of those materials in some of the loads that come in, and we have to be provided with provisions to take care of those, and that's what we've done. There's small incidental contamination, if you will, of the full load. So for example, where we talk about propane containers, we're not harvesting propane containers. We may find some in a load occasionally. Those will be stored and removed from the site. But they're small and incidental products. This is construction and demolition debris. It's what your house is made out of, what this building is made out of. Last, I just wanted to close in one remark. The Inland Wetland Watercourse Commission has already determined that this is not a significant activity. This hearing was held in the interest of the public, and we hope that the information that we've provided you with has been satisfactory to educate the public on what we're proposing. With that said, I'd like to hand the table over to Chris Allen. He's from Land Tech, and he'll present the wetland report.
Good evening. My name is Christopher Allen. I'm a professional wetland scientist and a professional soil scientist with Land Tech Consultants from Westport, Connecticut. I've been with Land Tech since 1982. We did prepare and was submitted a wetlands and watercourse evaluation report. We were asked initially to delineate some of the wetlands that were not delineated previously by Mr. Lord on the property. Those wetlands included the intermittent watercourse that runs along the rail line between the building and a couple of small wetlands in this area here. Again, the watercourse that runs along the south side of the building, and then a couple of small watercourses on the west side, wetlands on the west side. We did delineate those, both Connecticut jurisdictional and federal jurisdiction wetlands. And then we were also subsequently asked to perform a wetlands evaluation, a functions and values evaluation, and all that information is included in the report that was submitted. I'll try and summarize that report briefly. We did identify 4 wetland areas on the property in addition to that water course that runs along the rail line. First water course, which we numbered, number 1 is up in the north corner in that area. It's that wetland is actually elevated approximately 8 feet above the elevation of the slab on site. It's on a higher plateau than the rest of the site. It's similar in elevation to Old Post Road. It receives runoff from Old Post Road. We characterize that as a seasonally flooded forested wetland. At this time of year, it does have standing water in it. It is forested. It has a cover story dominated by red maple, and it has a fairly dense understory of sweet pepper bush and blueberry. It does have a piped outlet. There's an outlet that discharges eventually into that water course along the rail line. As I said, we did do a wetland functions and values assessment. We found the principal functions of that wetland to be sediment retention, nutrient removal, and wildlife habitat, primarily for amphibian species.
Sorry to interrupt. Were there any vernal pool attributes that you noticed?
It does appear that it could. I didn't verify whether or not it is a successful, if it has obligate vernal pool species, but it does have the characteristics of vernal pools. It does have ponding at this time of year. I haven't seen it long enough to determine if that hydro period is long enough to support breeding amphibians, but it is possible. And as I said, it is above the elevation of the site itself, so there really is no impact associated with the site on that wetland. The water is not getting from the site towards that wetland. Wetland number 2 is a small wetland in this corner of the site, where it basically lies between that water tank and the rail line. It does have a piped inlet and outlet. It lies at the base of the fill slope of Route 1. It's characterized as a shrub wetland. It's dominated by saplings of red maple, alder, and several vines. It is a disturbed area. The soils are not natural soils. They're soils that have been graded in the past. As I said, it has a piped inlet and outlet, and it does discharge into that intermittent water course between the building and the railway. Because there is a water course associated with that wetland, we determined its principal function to be sediment removal during overbank flows. The third wetland is in close proximity to that wetland. It's basically between this western parking area and the rail line. In this area here. That is a small depressional wetland. It's isolated from the other wetlands. It has no hydrologic connection to any others. It's basically just a depression that was formed when they graded that driveway. It receives direct stormwater runoff from that parking area. It does not have a defined outlet. We would describe that again as a shrub wetland. It's vegetated primarily with alder, rose, and northern arrowwood, and some grasses. Since it does receive parking lot runoff, we determined its principal function to be sediment retention and nutrient removal from stormwater flows. Wetland number 4 is a wetland on the southeast corner of the site, over in this area. Again, that's kind of between that eastern parking area and the rail line. It's a small area of floodplain that's adjacent to that water course that flows along between the building and the railway. It's primarily forested. It is rather small, but it has a cover story of red maple and again another story of alder, sweet pepper bush, and some other shrubs. Again, because it is associated with the water course, we determined its principal function to be sediment retention when there's overbank flows from that water course. And then lastly, as we discussed, there's that water course that runs all along the building between the building and the railway. That is a constructed drainage ditch. Most of that, at least the western portion of that intermittent water course, has no natural bottom. It is totally lined with stone, railroad ballast, both within the channel and on its banks. It does have some accumulation of sediments in it, which support the growth of cattail. As you get further down on the eastern portion of that intermittent water course, its banks are lined with the railroad ballast and fill from the building. As I said, it was a constructed drainage channel. It's a straight channel that's primarily designed to convey the flow from the west to the east. This was the one that, at least on the eastern portion, along with Wetland 4, that Rich Snarsky commented that it could be tidally influenced. We didn't see we didn't see any evidence of tidal influence, but we're not going to argue the point. It could be tidal in that area. Regardless, I think the protections that are being provided, like Mr. Andrews said, are the same, whether it's tidal or not. The only difference would be if it was tidal, it would be out of your jurisdiction and would be under the jurisdiction of the Connecticut DEP, which regulates wetlands within the coastal jurisdiction line, which is a certain elevation. As far as functions and values for that wetland, again, we think sediment retention and nutrient removal are the primary functions of that one, because it does tend to trap sediments from runoff, both from on-site and off-site sources. And then we did do one additional review of off-site wetlands to the south of the building. This is probably the most significant wetland. It's the wetland down here, which actually extends further toward the east. That area of wetland, which is south of the building, appears to be a freshwater wetland. Unlike as you go further east, you get more of a saline influence. It becomes more of a salt marsh, which is dominated by Phragmites australis, or common reed. The wetland, this subject wetland south of the building, is classified again more as a scrub-shrub wetland. It's dominated by saplings of red maple, alder, and other shrubs. Since it is a larger wetland and it's relatively unimpacted, it has more wetland function values than some of the other wetlands that we reviewed on the site. They include flood flow alteration, sediment retention, nutrient removal, production, export, sediment shoreline stabilization, and wildlife habitat. We were asked to review the applicant's site plan and wetland mitigation measures, which we did. We included a narrative in the report on that. As Rich Snarsky said, there is no construction-related impacts. There will be no loss of natural areas as a result of reuse of this site. There's no new development being proposed other than development on areas of the site that have already been developed. Consequently, there will be no construction-related impacts. There will be no loss of wetland functions or values associated with the project. As you've heard, all recycling will be done inside the building, so everything is protected from the weather to reduce the impacts from rainfall and weather-related impacts, stormwater runoff. There is a flood management plan that has been proposed to minimize any impacts related to flooding of the site during the 100-year storm event. As Mr. Andrews explained, there is some stormwater drainage improvements, including hydrodynamic separators, and also now a stormwater quality swale, which will become part of the project. We also reviewed the letter from Catherine Zemekdik regarding the salt marsh advancement. Since there's no activities that are being proposed within the wetlands on site, those wetlands will remain as they are today. So any future encroachment of or salt marsh advancement into those areas will be unimpeded, so those areas will be preserved and not lost. And that concludes my comments. Turn it back to you, George.
Thank you, Mr. Evans.
You're welcome.
So from a technical perspective, I think that sums up our presentation. We look forward to responding to any questions that you may have. We have Tim Shields here that would just like to provide a closing remark with regard to our application. As I say, we'll certainly be available to listen to the questions and respond to those questions separately. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Tim Shields, Cronin Shields, 20 Water Street in Guilford. We're here this evening on behalf of the applicant. I just want to address a couple of quick points, if I may. What I'd like to do is read into the record a letter that was prepared by my partner, Tom Cronin. He could not be here tonight because he's down in St. John, so we have no pity for him. But this letter is important because we just want to emphasize some of the points that have been made by Mr. Andrew tonight. The letter advises that our firm obviously has been retained by the applicant. Our review of the record for this matter shows that the commission in its meeting in November of last year had decided that in the interest of the public to hold these public hearings. We note that as part of the record, the commission, as has been mentioned by Mr. Andrew already, did not find that this activity was a significant activity requiring public hearing. It's just being done in the public interest. Our client recognizes that the political expedience of holding the public hearings on a matter for which already engendered a great deal of public opposition. We've experienced this same kind of opposition when we applied and were granted a variance with the ZBA to permit the reconstruction of the collapsed structure that was originally on the property. That was done after the as-of-right period as provided in the regulations had expired. We were successful in obtaining that, and we actually were also successful in defending an appeal that was taken by one of the neighbors. So we do understand the depth of the opposition that is here, and it's not to be unexpected. And obviously we have great members of the public here that are here tonight that would like to comment. So that continues. There are a couple of immutable facts that seem relevant for the consideration of the application. First, the application does not involve any new use of the site by the applicant. It is essentially the same activities that were in existence beforehand. The proposed use is consistent with that prior use of the property, and before the collapse of that structure, resulting in a blight condition that's led to some of the delays here. The applicant had to go forward with and clean up and remediate that blight condition on the property. Second is the use being made by the former site owner before the collapse of the building was lawful in every respect. Again, we're permitting and proposing the same type of uses. Third, the new owners would have certain vested rights to reestablish the use, even if those rights are somewhat mitigated by the jurisdiction of the commission here. Fourth, because the application involves technical matters, it's important that the testimony received and considered by the commission in reaching its decision rises to the level of approaching expert testimony. That is really key for your decisions tonight. I know the public has great concern here and they want to comment, but by and large, our courts, the appellate court, the Supreme Court of our state, have determined that public concerns and comments and statements don't rise to that level of expert testimony that's required.
All right, please. Thank you.
I'm just stating the law for the commission. Our courts have routinely and consistently held that the general public does not usually possess the expertise required to opine on environmental impacts on the matter involving damage to the inland wetlands. Similarly, the courts have rejected administrative decisions based on mere speculation by the public that possible risk to the wetlands would be the basis of the decision. We remain hopeful that these decisions of our courts guide the commission as it navigates its way through the remainder of the public hearing. With that said, we must note that We do have concern about the very short time that we were afforded to respond to some of the reports that were submitted by the town's engineer. Specifically, the engineering report came in and was disclosed to us last Thursday, just before the 3-day holiday weekend. We've had very little time to digest that and respond to that. Mr. Andrews, Mr. Allen have done the best they can to address those issues tonight. But what I'd also like to point out is your procedural rules, specifically 9.2, prohibit the applicant from providing any demonstrable evidence, written evidence, updated reports, drawings, to support their application unless they're submitted 15 days prior to the hearing. We feel that that is a significant infringement on the due process rights of the applicant. We want to make that clear in the record so that we can preserve that issue on appeal if necessary. I will provide the report to the commission. I have provided, I hope, enough copies here for everyone to have.
Thank you, Attorney Shields. Just to be clear, were you asking for additional time to respond to DTC's comments, or are you just pointing out that your time frame to review was foreshortened in your opinion?
Yes.
The latter?
Yes, we have very little time to respond to, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
So you're not intending to prepare additional comments at this time?
Not at this point.
Thank you. Mr. Andrews, could you, one of the things that you did raise this evening that is new is discussion of primary treatment. You talked about adding some sort of treatment swale on the east side, but with very little detail. And you indicated that would be forthcoming. Is there, do you have the ability to describe that or show us where it is, any characteristics of it that you care to point out this time?
Absolutely. I've got I've got a slide up there that presents it. I apologize I wasn't able to get it on a 24 by 36, but I do have.
Oh, you have a copy. Great. Thank you.
Good. Okay. So this is what's referred to as a wet swale. The majority of my visits to the site, I have seen water flowing, although most of those visits have certainly been in the winter time. And so we're anticipating that the section, and if I may just bring you back to go into this drawing. Okay, the proposed location for this, is a better place to start, is right over here. Right over here. So there's a discharge pipe that comes from this wetland, as Krista spoke earlier. From this wetland, it goes all the way through pipe right to this location. So this is the wetland.
So wetland 1.
Wetland 1.
It would be receiving the outflow from wetland 1?
Correct.
Which, didn't we talk about wetland 1 wouldn't, in your opinion, be impacted at all?
Correct.
So what is this intended to treat?
It treats the stormwater associated with this portion of the parking area, as well as catch basin located right here. So it essentially services this part of the site.
Another parking area?
Yes. So if I can go back to the detail, what we typically do with those is we'll spot what elevation we need to design them for, and we'll provide a compost base in there and provide plantings. It'll be select plantings, and we'll typically provide a serpentine type apparatus, and what I try to do typically is provide the longest flow line I can through that little section. So what I can do is put some check dams within that, alternating, so that we enhance the contact with that. It's a relatively short section. If I had to estimate, I'd say it's about 50 or 60 feet in length, but we feel that we can further enhance the quality of stormwater, and as I said, in recognition of Mr. Snarsky's request, we wanted to provide that.
Thank you. Does anybody have questions for Mr. Enders on this specific proposal? No? Before we get to the public comment, there are two areas I do want to explore with you that I want to make sure I understand fully. And they're just broadly. One has to do with flood risk and mitigation, and the other with the materials themselves. And I'll deal with the flood risk mitigation first, right? So, as you pointed out, the finished floor elevation is 3 feet below the base flood level, which is the 100-year FEMA flood elevation. As I don't recall if it was the intervenor or if it was DTC, there could be other flooding events that are obviously greater than 9 feet, but are not at the 12-foot 100-year flood elevation. And I don't know if you have a recurrence interval for any of those types of events, but flood mitigation, obviously you could approach this with wet or dry flood proofing, and you chose wet flood proofing, right, to allow essentially the area to flood and flood waters to recede, and your plan speaks to that, right? This is your flood management plan. It's attachment C of your March 2nd, 2018 response to comments. So we have a copy of that. And in that, you indicate that upon receipt of a valid forecast for significant flooding up to an elevation of 8 feet or higher within the Clinton area, the following actions shall be taken. All liquids shall be placed on a rack system with a deck elevation of 13 feet or greater, or removed from the site before the storm event occurs. Unprocessed and processed stockpiles of construction and demolition debris located within the building on the tipping floor shall be shipped from the site so as to retain minimal material within the building. It is not anticipated that all of this material will be removed, but the overall volume shall be reduced. The question I got is, some of this seems a bit subjective, and I underscore valid forecast for significant flooding. What would you consider to be a valid flood warning? And I think that's important because on page 6 of that same letter that I referenced, you indicate that we're fortunate that in floods of this magnitude can be reasonably forecast up to 10 days ahead of the occurrence. This allows for adequate time to protect the facility from the potential impacts from such an event. And I'm not a certified floodplain manager, but I'm fortunate to know some, and I reached out to some of them, just really to educate myself. And one fellow, Dave Murphy at my one in McBroom, he's a CF, and he does a lot of municipal coastal work, and his opinion was that there are any number of types of events, not just flooding events, but if you were to use National Weather Service forecast, in his opinion, he would recommend that a winter storm warning, flood, blizzard, tropical storm, or hurricane all have the potential to cause flooding of this type of magnitude that we're talking about. And the ability to forecast 10 days in advance and ship material out in all of those scenarios, to me, seems very unlikely, because I don't think you've got 10 days notice. So I'd like your thoughts on that, please.
Yeah, I would agree. I think 10 days is probably aggressive in my statement there, but I think we've all experienced considerable flooding events. For example, Storm Sandy, where we had considerable forecast of flooding associated with that. And this particular site was unimpacted. It didn't rise to the level of actually impacting this, but I think we all were able to experience that as a relatively recent storm event, significant storm event, where the weather services were very successful, I think, in establishing what they felt was going to be a significant tide, a significant wind situation, and produce significant flooding within certain coastal towns. So I think the opportunity for understanding that is certainly current and certainly there, and typically forecast well ahead of what we would certainly need to mitigate what we feel would be most appropriate for an incoming storm. As I mentioned, I think the first and foremost would be to start shipping material and reduce receipt of material at the facility so that we can reduce the tipping floor load, the material located on the tipping floor. We also, as indicated in the management plan, would either eliminate the liquids that are stored at the facility or raise those to an elevation of 13 pedestal type storage. And we would move the heavy equipment essentially up the hill. The driveway entrance to this goes up to elevation 28 or so. So it gives us plenty of time to implement that. I think we feel very comfortable that we'd be successful in implementing that on probably as short as, provided there wasn't a weekend in the middle, but probably as short as a 2 or 3 day notification. And we could certainly handle the simpler stuff, such as moving the equipment and relocating liquid materials, certainly within a day's notice. Shipping the material from the site, shutting down incoming loads is a little bit more difficult, takes a little bit more forecast.
But I appreciate that response, but your wet-proofing flood management plan does call for having sufficient time to take certain mitigation activities, and it seems like a large part of that plan calls for removing the majority of material from the site, which doesn't seem like you're saying you'd be able to do in all cases, right? I guess what I'm saying is you can't guarantee sufficient advance notice to remove the bulk of, or ideally all of the material out of the tipping room floor, which will be flooded at that point.
That's correct. I couldn't guarantee that.
Is there the feasibility of putting all of the material above 12 feet MSL?
Well, when we initially looked at the project, we had a couple of options. One would be to raise the slab floor to elevation 12 or elevation 13 in accordance with your regulations, and we contemplated that. And the difficulty we have with that is that we would need to provide compensatory flood storage for that portion of material that we'd be filling with that. And the site is very challenging. It's got a very shallow water table. It's got pavement and paved parking areas and roads that basically surround the building structure. The only area that we could possibly do that would be across the north of the site, up in this area, which would be right up here. And unfortunately, that's bedrock. It's exposed bedrock along here, and we have that wetland, which is located up there. So it doesn't afford us a real opportunity to provide reasonable compensatory flood storage within that, which is why we didn't raise that slab floor.
Have your, still on the same topic of flood and potential for flooding, have any of your calculations taken into account potential sea level rise?
No, we haven't looked at that at all.
CERCLA recently came out with a paper, happy to share with you. I have a copy here by James O'Donnell. He's a PhD there. I don't know if you know them, but they're funded by the state of Connecticut, associated with UConn, and this is what they're tasked with doing, essentially looking at impacts along, especially along the shoreline. And their projection for Clinton is that basically that this area of the state, not just Clinton, but by 2050, so basically within 30 years, they're saying plan for 50 centimeters of sea level rise, so it's 20 inches. So I'm curious as to whether or not you've looked at what that might do as far as the potential for flooding and exacerbation of the flooding impacts that you're planning for.
Clearly, if that manifests, it would certainly increase the frequency of flooding that we would see at the site. I think that's fairly clear and obvious. We're comfortable with the flood management plan that we have and the implementation of that, and the screening that we're provided to contain the materials that are stored within the building structure, that will be successful in removing the heavy equipment, removing the liquids from the floodway, and retaining the products that are stored within the building facility, within the building itself when flood occurrences do arise. As I mentioned, we would certainly have preferred the ability to raise the slab elevation, but we would have had some significant challenges associated with that, with the compensatory flood storage requirements.
Does anybody have questions on slide? Yeah.
Since you're no longer using that external area for stockpiling, to the area to the east of where your proposed building is, have you looked at that area as a possible of removing the slab and doing your flood storage in that area so that it would allow you to use the footprint of your proposed building to raise it up to elevation 12 above out of the 100-year?
Actually, we didn't look at that at all. We just cut the stockpile out 10 days ago or so. So we didn't look at the removal of that. That was actually a pretty significant part of our plan, was aggregate storage as well. So it took us a little while to actually separate from that, but we did not necessarily look at that at this point. But it certainly could be an excellent provision for the additional 3 feet that we would need there. Certainly chip away at that volume of material.
Anybody else, commissioners? No? One last question on oh, do you have? Sorry. Eddie, Chris?
You mentioned that you're not permitted to carry or to accept wet waste. But what is the process if a truck does come in with wet waste? I mean, how do you know that it's in there?
Rejected. The loads are rejected. We have a responsibility under the solid waste permit to inspect a certain, typically they'll write the permit with a certain frequency of inspections of loads. It's typically not every single load. However, the majority of the facilities that I'm associated with and work with actually inspect every load that comes in.
And you have somebody go and jump in it?
There's a couple,
do you know?
Couple of different methods. One, many of these facilities, and in fact probably this facility, would be required to actually have a Geiger counter. As the vehicles come in, they pass under that. And the majority of them, since that's over the load, will provide a camera up there so that the scale house operator can actually observe what's in the load, and as the truck is pulling up to the scale, they have them drop the tarp at that point so that they can perform that inspection. But typically the majority of the facilities that I've been working with as of late have been inspecting every load.
All set, Andrew? Okay. One last question on flood elevation. I did speak to DEP, the folks that you've been in contact with your application, both for Frank Gagliardo and Gabby Frignell. And one of the things that Gabby had indicated is that in a meeting with you, she did, because of this question of sea level, potential for sea level rise, to meet with the town and explore with the town whether or not they're reconsidering their coastal setbacks. And she was unaware if you had done that. So I'm curious as to whether or not you've reached out to the town and whether or not you are discussing with the town whether or not the coastal setbacks need to be revised.
We haven't done that at this point. We took notes at the meeting that she was referring to, and the department was required to follow up with an RFI, a request for information in writing. So we refrained from actually any action on that meeting until such time as we received the written document. We were in touch with them approximately 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago, and the document actually just came in last week. So at this point, we're in a position to move forward with the preparation of the response to that. And in fact, we only have 30 days at this point to respond to that. So that's something that we would be actuating within the next 30 days. But we haven't done that.
So the status of your application with DEEP is they determined your application was sufficient, but they did have a request for additional information.
That's
They provided that to you, and you have a 30-day window to respond.
That's
You're
correct.
working on that.
Yes.
Might your response to your DEEP application alter your proposal?
We don't believe so. As I mentioned, we did talk about the subjects of it, the questions and such that they had at the meeting. We did jot down notes. I believe we're aware of all of the issues that they have, although the RFI may have had a couple of last-minute zingers that we haven't seen at this particular point. But we didn't see anything at that particular meeting that concerned us that it would impact the application that we have in front of you.
I think I said that might have been the last question, but it wasn't. I do have a question on your new proposal for that you had a detail of showing the screening along with mesh, and given that you're saying that the material on the tipping room floor may or may not be removed in certain quantities. It may be partially removed, it may be somewhat removed. Nonetheless, it will be flooded. And it is your belief that this cable reinforced galvanized mesh containment structure will be sufficient to protect downstream wetlands from soluble pollutants, or what are you thinking this will? I think we've had comments thus far in the record that it seems that it is not designed to protect against soluble pollutants, but it is going to entrain and trap larger floatables and things of that sort, possibly sediment, things of that nature. Is that correct?
Yes, indeed.
And so do you have a proposal to treat, as floodwaters recede, are you proposing to treat in any way any discharge that could be contaminated because of what is on the tipping room floor at that point?
Short of the mesh protection that we have, short of the screening, no.
Yes. I'm sorry?
No.
No.
No, short of the mesh. Our intent is essentially to contain that material within the building structure. You gotta give
Yeah, sorry, you're gonna have to, unless you want him to convey that, if you don't mind, just for the record, so we can get it, because folks can't hear. Thank you.
I'm the property owner of Old Post Road, and we bought the property probably Richard Kowaleski.
Thank you,
So
Richard.
we bought the property probably 4 years ago, 5 years ago. It was a collapsed building, and we applied for a demolition permit, and started in April of 2013 to clean the building up. The building was on the ground for 2 years. No one complained about it. There was a blight ordinance put against the owners, and that's why they decided to sell the piece of property. We bought it, and we cleaned it up. It took 4 months, and for 4 months I worked outside with heavy equipment on the property with the mesh screen up. Never contaminated the wetlands. Nobody ever came down to say hi or, hey Rick, what are you doing? You know? But we cleaned up the place. I moved 40 to 50 truckloads of material a day out of there. I also used the rail to do the C&D. Worked 7 days a week because I was under a window where I had to get the building cleaned up by July 31st of I can't remember, 2013 or 2014. But being on the property for 4 months, trucks coming in and out of there, trucks coming in, filling up my equipment with oil or diesel fuel. Not one person ever came down to the property to see what I was doing, or, I mean, the noise on Sundays and Saturdays, because I ran the equipment myself, I was a little bit nervous about doing it. But you guys live 500 feet away, and no one came over and said hi, or hey, you know, are you allowed to be doing this? No, to the commission. And it boggles my mind that see, we ran the transfer station for 4 months with no one to complain. We cleaned up the mess. It cost us over $700,000 to clean up the mess. And now I want to build a facility and run it inside of a building, and now everybody wants to, or the commission wants to give me a hard time.
Okay. Thank you, Richard. Thank you. So, Mr. Andrews, if I could, I want to talk about the materials for a little bit, and then, what time is it here? Oh gosh, I'm sorry folks, will you indulge me a little bit to pursue a line of questioning on the material, and then we can get to your comments. So, the proposed commercial reduction, this is, as I understand it, a commercial volume reduction facility for C&D waste, correct?
Correct.
And that as a volume reduction facility, there's no municipal solid waste, no hazardous waste, right? And that's what you're seeking deep approval for.
Construction and demolition debris.
Construction and demolition, correct. And your application before them is for 2,500 tons per day that would consist primarily of wood, gypsum, masonry, concrete, asphalt, shingles, associated oversized municipal solid waste, such as furniture and mattresses, as well as non-hazardous contaminated soil. Materials that will be recovered for recycling will include aluminum antifreeze, lead-acid batteries, mixed batteries, computers and electronics, used oil, oil filters, paints and stains, appliances with CFCs, shingles, stainless steel tires, cardboard, ferrous iron, sheetrock, single-stream recyclables, plastics, copper wire, clean unpainted wood, concrete, and propane tanks with valves. This is from your application, John.
Correct.
It is anticipated that there may be incidental electronic equipment and appliances, batteries, paints, and stains commingled with the C&D waste. Okay? That's from your executive summary attachment B, dated March 2nd, 2018, response to comments. So I just want to confirm that nothing has changed, correct, as far as what you're proposing to be bringing into that site. That all holds true.
Yes, just let me clarify. As I mentioned during my earlier testimony, all of the facility is going to be permitted for construction and demolition debris. We anticipate that all of those products listed could be mixed in, commingled with the C&DD. And in fact, based upon the experience of the operator, that's what formulated us adding provisions for all of those materials. So we're not receiving batteries, we're not receiving propane containers, etc. We're receiving C&D, separating that material, and that's the way it goes. But the facility is going to be permitted for the C&D. Those incidentals will essentially be sorted out of that material.
Sure. And have you or have you not amended your permit request with DEEP to allow for additional materials?
We have not.
You have not?
No.
Okay. I wasn't sure in talking with Gabby Fermion whether or not you did revise it to allow for putrescent MSW.
MSW. Now, she specifically indicated we're not going to permit you for that in our meeting, and that's in the RFI, so that will be stricken from the application.
So that will be taken out. So
yeah.
you may have been asking for it, but now you're going to be taking that out.
Yep,
so
exactly.
No putrescent MSW.
Yep.
Okay, it's further my understanding from my conversations with them that there is no requirement in DEEP's Waste Engineering Enforcement Division per their regulations that for any testing of any inbound material. Is that correct?
From a DEEP perspective, that's correct.
And you're not proposing any testing before this application. You're not going above and beyond the deep requirement, their regulation, and saying we will, regardless of what deep does or doesn't require, we are going to test every load that comes in.
No, we're not proposing that. And once again, I think in the last month's testimony, we presented the sequence of how the demolition permit is actually required.
Right.
And the testing is actually performed at that earlier stage.
Yes. No, I appreciated that. That helped inform me. But I was still a little bit confused because of last month, some of the discussion, some of the other folks who commented on residential waste. And so in discussing this with Deep, again, this is my understanding from conversations with the permitting folks, that their definition of C&D waste actually does allow for residential cleanouts, which could include quantities of household hazardous waste. Because it's not considered hazardous material by EPA or state statute, right? Because it's residentially generated. So I just want to clarify that. Is that your understanding also? Is that even though you're applying for a C&D permit from the state, because they do not regulate residentially generated hazardous waste, it could conceivably contain quantities of that?
It's interesting to actually hear that perspective, because in the application that we prepared and in the application guidance document, it specifically identifies that hazardous waste cannot be received at the facility, and if it is, you need to quarantine the load and such and take certain actions to report it immediately to the DEP and remove that material, put it in a specific location. So I think the incidence of that would be extremely low, and would certainly be a surprise to the operator of the facility.
But it's still possible.
Could be possible, absolutely, yep. And it would be sorted out, as I mentioned, and it would be addressed in accordance with what the permit requirements are. And don't forget, now, once it's received at the facility, inadvertently, that material has to go somewhere. So at that point, it is regulated. So the objective would certainly be not to receive it, but if it is received and you're not able to bring it back to the facility, you have certain actions that you have to take in accordance with regulation at that particular point. And you'd be bound to implement that.
So if a load comes in that's contaminated, because it was from somebody's roll-off dumpster, and you see this all the time, people are cleaning out their basements, they're cleaning out their garage, or whatever. I'm not saying I'm guilty of ever doing it, but I know people who've done this, where they've just chucked all manner of stuff in there, right? That, you're saying, if it ever came in, would be segregated and contained and removed and treated in a special way? Is that what you're saying?
Reject the load, Rick?
So you inspect, so you are inspecting every load before you tip it?
Sorry.
Because I thought previously you said you don't inspect every load. There's no specific screening.
Every load that comes into the facility does get inspected. The minute you open up the door, you see something in the load that doesn't belong in the load, that truck is pulled out of the building or pulled over to the side. We have two things we can do. We can call DEEP, or we can call the EPA, and you'll see how bad it is. And that truck is confiscated and cannot leave the facility until DEEP comes down and tags the material and then sends the material to a specific location that will accept that material.
So how do you, I'm just trying to make sure I understand this. So the process is, the identification process, I guess I want to make sure I understand. So if someone is throwing just chucking some pesticide into their roll-off dumpster and it happens to break open and contaminate whatever else they've thrown in there, cushions and wood and whatever, you have a way of identifying that this is contaminated?
Yeah, that truck would be pulled out away from everybody else, put to the side. We make a telephone call to DEEP and have them come in out and inspect the loads.
Okay, thank you.
And we send stuff to the burn plant in Bridgeport all the time, and the same thing happens. Your truck pulls into the burn plant at Resco in Bridgeport, and they open up the door and they see something that's not supposed to be in there. That truck is tagged, put to the side until Deep could get down there to inspect the load, and until that driver and the owners of the vehicle were to go with the load.
I think the concern that I've got is not necessarily that that could happen and that it could be having to be dealt with whatever the process entails. It's that there's the potential at some point that that happens and you have some flooding event and you've got now contaminated material in the building that is now going to impact wetlands downgrade. That's the concern that I have. But did folks have other questions on materials before we move quickly to the public comment period? No? All right. All right, thanks for indulging me, folks. It is about 7 minutes to. We will move to the public comment period. Is there anyone here who signed up who wants to speak in favor of the application? Wait, there's a whole... No. Is there anyone here who would like to speak against? We have a list there? There's a sign-up sheet. If someone would be kind enough to... Thank you. I got a pen out of the deal. Let's see. Don McAlson? They changed the order. Oh, they changed the order. All right, number 1. Oh, Campbell Hudson. Attorney Hudson. Oh, he changed the order. He put himself in. Yes. Please name for the record.
For the record, my name is Campbell Hudson. I'm an attorney. My offices are in Centerbrook, not far from here. I'm going to try to keep my remarks very brief because quite a few people want to say something. As I mentioned at the previous hearing that most of you are at, I represent the interveners in this matter, who are again interveners, Herb Clark, who's here, and Demco, who are owners of properties that are in the Heritage Industrial Park immediately adjoining this property. The Demco is the owner of that very large building that immediately butts this property to the east, in which a large facility is operated for Tower Laboratories. And they are strongly opposed to this application because of the detrimental effect, not just on residential properties, but potentially on these industrial and adjoining properties. They feel that this will have a very detrimental impact. Just at the southern end of that Tower Laboratories Demco building, there is a wetlands area there, just to the east of the property that is the subject of this application. And the Demco owners are very concerned that that could be impacted by this as well, that in the wetlands area. Just a couple of comments, and then it's really important for the technical people to really address what is primarily a technical issue. Some of the things that these reports you've seen have talked also not only about waters being impacted by water flooding on the property, but also what about if there was a fire? And you know, this stuff doesn't happen every day, but I don't think it's mere speculation. You can see, if you're familiar with stuff about how frequently this seems to happen, even within our own area, the large fire that we just had up in Essex a few years ago, a large one in Willimantic, one very recently in Queens, New York. These places have a history of that perhaps comes from not paying attention. I don't know the answer to that, but when all the water gets poured on this to put out the fires, it's got to go somewhere. And where does it go? Back into the wetlands. One of the important things to talk about is the wetlands, and the Department of Agriculture report that you've talked about before also talks about watercourses, which is in fact part of your jurisdiction as well. And the Hammock River starts right across the tracks there. So these are the headwaters of the Hammock River, and I think you all know better than I where the Hammock River flows, comes out into the harbor, and I believe that is something that you need to seriously consider as well. One of the things that was interesting in hearing some of the comments tonight, which answer some of the things, that there seems to be a view by the applicant that underlies this. And it's been stated that this is the same use as one of the general uses that has been proposed. I can tell you we strongly disagree with that view. We believe this is not a permitted use under the current zoning regulations applicable to this property. And they're going to have to do steps to address that. Now, ultimately, that's a zoning issue, not an issue for this commission. But I think it's important to understand behind this, we think that this is a very different type of use than what was being done there before, and therefore the standards are very different. We do disagree with the comments made by Attorney Shields before. Obviously, that's what we lawyers do. But one of the things he did mention, he said the same activity. We disagree with that, and he talked about mere speculation. We're not talking about here that the stuff is mere speculation with respect to flooding, with respect to the potential for fire, with respect to all these other issues. These aren't just things that might happen somewhere once in a blue moon. These are things that regularly can be expected to happen, as will be the effects of sea level rise. So this is not mere speculation. I think that the big point here is that, and I said this before, and certainly where my clients come from, they understand the need for these facilities. They understand that this man has a right to make a living doing the sort of things he does. All of this stuff has to be dealt with. There's no argument with that. In fact, we understand these people are in the construction business themselves. They have dealt with this in the past. The real key thing here is it's not an appropriate site for that type of work. And I think that that was actually well stated in Andrew Bevilacqua's letter, which was actually read at the beginning, but I just want to reread this one little conclusion at the end of his, because I think he stated very well. Said, the operation of the facility is at least as important as the initial design in terms of the long-term protection of the environment. They've got good engineers. We have no doubt that their engineers are very good. But this type of facility has a history, not by these people necessarily, but who knows, of not being operated on the long term the way that they should be. It says the location of this facility, this is again from the Bevilacqua letter, near inland and possibly tidal wetlands and within a FEMA designated floodplain will only serve to magnify the critical need for highly effective best management practices in the facility's day-to-day operations. A similar facility in a location without these critical environmental constraints would have a greater margin of error and possibly less overall concerns about the potential operational issues. That's the point. This is a lousy place to put something like this. With that, I'll turn it over to the next people in the line who are, I think, the technical people, Steve Trinkus.
Thank you, Mr. Hudson. Steve Trinkus?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Steve Trinkus for the record. I'm a professional engineer from Southbury, Connecticut. One of the residents is passing out copies of a letter from March 2nd from my office that is in response to the revised plans and comments from the applicant. I know Mr. Allen from Land Tech a long time ago, but in looking at his report, and I'm not a wetland scientist, but in reading his assessment of the stormwater management report, it basically parrots what's in the Laredo report. It's not really an independent evaluation, you know, it's repeating the same information. So I think you need a better assessment. I think Rich Snarsky gave you that. It's been discussed on the forecast of weather events. You know, if we look back at, I think it was Hurricane Irma that hit Florida, 12 hours beforehand, it was forecast to go up the East Coast and went the other way. So, you know, you're not going to get 10 days forecast. You can also have summertime thunderstorms that can come through and drop 3 inches of rain in a 4-hour period with, quite honestly, 2 hours warning. That's the type of weather that we have. We have short duration, high intensity rainfall events that show up very quickly, especially during the hot summer. You know, the screens with the non-woven filter fabric on the bottom, the non-woven filter fabric, you can poke a stick through. This is what we use on top of septic systems. It's not a highly durable material because it's very fibrous and it's easily cut and broken. So things can get out. You also have the upper section beyond 4 foot that's completely open. You'll hear, I think, maybe one of the other residents from the area talk about airborne pollutants. You know, these are big garage doors. That they're open. The building is not sealed. We keep hearing this is under a building. It's sealed. Well, it's not sealed. The doors are open. So this material is being processed. And when you start moving construction debris around, dust is very common. The way to keep dust down is to water it. Now you have things draining off. I will tell you, having worked for developers since the late 70s, older developers, and thank God, unfortunately, they have passed away, but they would pretty much throw everything in dumpsters, paint cans, thinner, you name it. You know, they didn't segregate stuff, and I think it's really unrealistic to, if you're bringing a load in here, you've got to dump it on the floor to see what's in it. And once you have it on the floor, you know, if there is some spillage, it's on its way out the door. I mean, that's the reality here. You're not, how do you see what's in the bottom of the dumpster? If these trucks are coming and they should have a loose tarp over them, you know, you can get rainfall in them. You know, it's really impossible to say you're going to keep this material dry. That's just, it's not a reality in this type of stuff. You know, there are changes. I have to disagree with Mr. Allen. There will be changes in the water quality of the wetlands because of the lack of appropriate treatment by the stormwater systems. Mr. Snarski is right on point. Separators are secondary. They are also not 80% efficient. I do have one typo in the middle of page 2. I talk about 18 years ago from 2010. It should be 8 years. The New Jersey TARP data goes back a long time. It's not the state of the art. I cited it last time. I'll say it again for the record. The University of New Hampshire Stormwater Center has research of a real-world parking lot, 9 acres of directly connected pavement, and separators in this configuration online remove 29% of total suspended solids. That's the reality. You can take all of the information in the back of the Laredo report from Contech. It's nice, it's a paperweight, it's not relevant to this application. The configuration of the separators is the problem. The DEP Stormwater Manual from 2004 also talks about retrofits. And if we subscribe to the applicant's philosophy, well, this is, you know, the same building, the same parking area. Well, just because it's the same building, same parking area, and pollutants were occurring in the past, you have a different use being proposed here. You need to address water quality, because otherwise we're not going to make positive improvements in the environment unless we fix problems that already exist, as far as that goes. Our attorney talked about the fire aspect, so while I mentioned the letter, I'm not going to get into that. You know, on the survey maps by the applicant, the old wetland boundary is still shown on there. Mr. Allen's boundary is shown on the Laredo site plans, but for consistency, you should have the correct information on all plans. It's also noted that part of the flood line goes into this wet swale behind the building on the south side. If it's subject to tidal flows and moderate wave action, and that's exactly what it says on the plan, then you may have some tidal influence here. I mean, I'm not a wetland scientist, I'm just going by what's, you know, on the plan. Again, the separators do not address water quality. You need a primary system. The wet swale the applicant proposes, as the chairman asked about, it's on the east side of the building. It's primarily getting the water from that upper wetland. The majority of the parking lot and the truck scales, where all the trucks are coming in, are on the other side, the west side. So this swale is not going to do much of anything. It may treat that little bit of water, but 50 or 60 feet of a wet swale is not going to give you a high pollutant removal, especially when there's not much pollutants in the water in the first place. So all the water on the west side, which comes into the swale between the spur line and the rail, is not going to be adequately treated, and that's going to go into the freshwater wetlands and ultimately into your tidal wetlands, as far as that goes. Another aspect of the DEP manual is what's called the runoff capture volume. For sites that are within 500 feet of a tidal boundary, which I would submit this applies, that you need to retain the first inch of runoff from the impervious area. It's the same as the water quality volume, but they call it the runoff capture volume. That has not been provided. It's not a treatment, it's a retention on the site, so you're not discharging that potentially polluted water. We've heard a lot that everything's coming in by truck and we're going to have 2,500 tons and 45% of it's going to be recycled. Well, I have an obvious question. If you're recycling 45%, what happens to everything else? I mean, you know, what happens to all the other material, quite honestly? You know, if you're recycling a certain amount of the wood and everything, what do you do with the rest of it? We have yet to hear what's going to happen to that other material. Does it leave the site? We're being told that some of it's going to leave by rail, some will leave by truck. But there's not a definitive statement that, yes, we're taking out so many tons by rail. You have, you know, no information on that. So you have to go, to me, on the assumption that it's all going to go in and out by truck. And again, movement of the vehicles themselves simply increase the pollutant loads on the site as far as that goes. And I stick by, my conclusions from my first letter. This will have adverse water quality impacts on the wetlands. The stormwater management system is not adequate to address those. There's some other technical concerns. The applicant is showing the pipes on the west side to be upgraded from 24 to 36-inch pipe. Well, if we're not changing the impervious area, why are we going to bigger pipes? There's a lot of unanswered questions, in my professional opinion, that we just don't know the answers of. But as proposed, even with the modifications, it poses a highly probable adverse impact. We know separators do not do much for soluble pollutants, so oils and grease can be in solution, and they can pass through online separators such as this and be discharged right into the freshwater wetlands. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Trinkus. Mr. Hiddle, are you here?
For the record, my name is Darby Hiddle, speaking on behalf of the intervener. I'm a Connecticut licensed environmental professional with more than 20 years experience evaluating potential impacts to sites. Thank you. Thank you to the committee members. Seems like you're asking all the right questions. I've got some overheads, if I could get them up here. Jim, did you give them copies of the? Okay, so yeah, what you have here is actually just sort of a recap of what was talked about last month by me. We had a number of interested parties asking to see actual copies of what I was referring to. There's just a couple of important documents that I think you need to be aware of. And so I understand that the applicant has modified their application and is now proposing a number of safety measures or a number of measures, from what I heard tonight, that are aimed at reducing potential impacts to the on-site and adjacent wetlands. And that's interesting because in the applicant's submittal to the DEP on the Coastal Consistency Review Form, if I could just get the next page up there, I want to forward. And so go back, here we go. So it's interesting, in section 4, let's see. Here we go. On page 4 of 5, the applicant has indicated that there are no potential impacts associated with this project, or that the potential impacts are simply not applicable. So my question to the commission and the committee is that if the applicant is acknowledging here at the town that there are potential impacts, to the best of our knowledge, they have not resubmitted a revised Coastal Consistency Review Form acknowledging to the state of Connecticut that there are potential impacts. So can't have your cake and eat it too. They're telling us that they recognize that there are potential impacts and here's what they're going to do to address them, but at the state level, none of the potential impacts are applicable. And we have a problem with this. And again, to restate, to restate that, what has been said before, this just, in our opinion, is just not an appropriate location for this facility. Last month, we made the committee members aware of a general permit for the staging and transfer of contaminated soil, which is actually, I believe we have a copy of it here. A hard time here. Have a copy of the, here it is, here's a copy of the general permit. So we understand that the applicant has withdrawn the proposal to store material outdoors. And what we just want you to know is that this general permit to the state of Connecticut is a registration only. It can be obtained with just simply submitting a $250 check to the state of Connecticut. And this permit can be executed indoors as well as outdoors. Up to 10,000 cubic yards of contaminated soil and sediment could be staged and transferred at a site like this one simply by submitting a check to the state of Connecticut. So if the applicant chose to stage and transfer contaminated soil in the building, they could do so with this general permit. They likely could do so. And if you think there's money in getting rid of clean waste, you should understand that there's a lot more money associated in getting rid of contaminated waste. So, this type of permit enables would enable the applicant to have significantly greater revenue for the facility at a much higher risk. Much of the soil that could be staged and transferred under this general permit originates from contaminated sites such as gasoline stations where there have been leaking tanks, industrial facilities, and other sites where the contaminated soil is actually excavated from below the water table and it's saturated. It comes in with a high water content. And I'd really like to hear I liked to hear the DTC report. Their concerns are all valid about leachate. Steve just mentioned that the facility's not closed. There's going to be trucks driving in and out of the facility. So there will be leachate with any wet loads, and under this general permit, those wet loads would contain contamination that could potentially run right out into the wetlands. So in closing, although we understand that waste resources are needed in Connecticut, this is absolutely not an appropriate location for this facility. And the proposed facility, even though my understanding is that the proposed facility cannot be denied based on potential impacts, according to the applicant's attorney. You cannot deny the application based on potential impacts. This seems ridiculous. We've pointed out many potential impacts. The applicant has stated to the state of Connecticut that they believe there are no potential impacts, and that we feel that the potential risk associated with this facility is simply unacceptable to this community. Thank you.
All right, yay, very good, very good. You all want to learn. So right now it is 9:15, and what we are checking feverishly, where's Christine, where's our first one? She is checking for us. She's busy, she's on the phone right now. Yes, she's on the phone. She's checking to see what facilities are available so that we can get everyone who signed up an opportunity to speak, because as I said, 9:30 is when we are booted out of here. We do have, and what we're up against is a window for us to close the public hearing. And statutorily, we've got 20 more days to do that. If they give us an extension, which I'm hoping they will do. Which brings us up to April 23rd. We have confirmed that the green room at the town hall is available on April 23rd. However, it would not accommodate, likely wouldn't accommodate this number of folks. So that's what Christine is, she was checking to see if Morgan is available on or before that date. So what we will need to do before we close this evening is to identify what that date and that time will be, so you all know. And then what I'd love to do is have it right now so that anyone who signed up would be not able to make that date. We'd move you to the head of the list so that you can get your comments in right tonight, okay? But until we have that date, we're going to go ahead with the Yep, it is a Monday. So we'll move next to number 4. It's Don. Yep, go ahead. Oh, yes, ma'am.
My name is Don McCallson. I'm from...
hang on, Don. She has a question, I believe. Just procedural, I believe.
Thank you. Yes. You have to go to the microphone. Is there a way for people to publicly comment or express their comments to you guys? Do you have an email we should
Sure.
send to?
Certainly.
Maybe
Letters,
some of us don't want to
emails?
come out. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay?
Yes, go ahead,
My name's Don McColson, 7 Settlers Lane in Clinton. First of all, I'd like to thank the commissioners, all of you, for the great work you're doing. It's very hard work. And I'd like to look at you guys as the guardian of our very precious wetlands. Now, I've heard comments last month and tonight from the applicants like they're going to be the guardians of the wetlands. Now, I don't believe that for a minute. They said they were so proud of the fact last month that they were the only, this was going to be the only facility of this kind that was done, where everything was going to be done indoors. Tonight, they said 6 times that all of the processing was going to be done indoors. In fact, there are no doors. Last month, they explained the construction of the building, and on the north wall and on the south wall being adjacent to the tracks, that there are multiple large openings that are doorways, basically, all along both sides of the building. And these doors at that point would never be closed. In fact, there are no doors. Tonight we find out that they have screens. Well, screens don't keep out dust. Certainly the top doesn't keep out dust. So let me ask everyone here to picture yourself standing in the middle of that building. You're standing in that building when it's fully operational. A tractor trailer comes in and dumps 40,000 pounds of debris. First of all, how do you inspect what's in the truck before you dump it on the area? Okay? Now, if anybody knows anything about construction debris, when you dump 40,000 pounds on the ground in this building, which has no doors, there's going to be a cloud of dust. A cloud of dust that contains maybe hazardous materials, but certainly very, very fine material, very fine dust that's going to be suspended for a long time. So let's think about this. The doors are open, they have some screens, which don't stop the dust. Now let's just say from the north, there's a 10-mile-an-hour wind coming from the north. What's going to happen? It's going to blow this cloud of dust right out the south side of the building, over the railroad track, over that little trough that has part of the inland waters, over the open land, and in 28 seconds, it's going to go 140 yards right where that big condo complex is. Is it going to stop there? These fine particles stay suspended for a long, long time. This material can go all the way to the shore. Now, there was a discussion about asbestos. The applicant said last month that there's a lot of regulations and lots of permits that you have to get and expensive fees, but they do all that to just prove that there's no asbestos in the load. Do you really believe that that's what's going to happen with every load that comes into this place? I don't believe that for a minute. And besides my speculation on that, last month they said, when he was explaining what's in the trucks, as was mentioned tonight, and I'll quote as clearly as I can, well, there's construction debris, but sometimes there's cans of oil, sometimes there's paint, sometimes there's propane tanks, sometimes there's tires. Tonight, the gentleman said you're going to have incidental occurrences of these other materials other than construction debris. Well, I was given a copy of the DEP applicants where they show how much of these other materials that they want to be allowed to bring in. If you look at the weight, it corresponds to 1,252 tires a day, 278 propane tanks. If they didn't expect that kind of volume, why would they put it in the application to the DEP? Makes no sense. And as far as liquid on the floor, well, I talked to a lot of construction people who are in the business of construction debris, And I say, how do you deal with this dust? They say, oh, we spray it with water. Well, that's not a great solution, because now you got a slurry on the floor that everybody's walking through. The trucks are dragging it out into the driveway, up into the roads. So what happens with this debris on the roads when the first rain comes up? Where's that going to go? Right into the wetlands. And how about this dust cloud that comes out the south side of the building? It's going to deposit some of that dust right on the ground. When the rain comes out, where's that going to go? Where's it going to go? Right, I can't talk, I understand that. Right in the wetlands. So I think there's so many problems with this. And that...
Are you almost done now?
I almost done. I'm really going to go fast. A lot of things have been said, but I want to mention one quick thing. They talked about the fires. You know, the fires could be a disaster. Now we're talking about burning tires, black, billowing smoke, and worry about exploding propane tanks. I wouldn't want to send out volunteers that could fight that fire. But in conclusion, I want to say this. What happens after the fire? What happens if they abandon a property? Maybe there's no fire. Maybe the business plan doesn't work out, and they go bankrupt, and they abandon the property. But what happens if DEP comes in and says, you've been contaminating the wetlands for the last 2 years, we're shutting you down? Then where are we? We have an environmental cleanup disaster that the town and its taxpayers might be liable for cleaning up this terrible mess that they left behind. And it doesn't sound like a very good situation to me. And I think it's, as the guardian of our wetlands, with all the information that's come through, I hate to say it, but I think it would be irresponsible for this commission to approve this application. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right. It is 9:24, and we did get word from Christine. She's earning her salary tonight, that this facility, the school, is available on the 16th through the 20th, but I think you're committed on the 18th for ZBA. So 16, 17, 19, or 20. So I'm looking to the commissioners as to whether or not anyone has a conflict with any of those dates. April 16, 17, 19, or 20. 20 is a Friday? So you don't want Fridays, you don't want Mondays? 16, 17, 19, 20. So will the 17th work for everybody? That is a Tuesday. That is tax day. It's good for Chris. Chris, you're good. Eddie, you're good. Carl? Should be okay. Everybody else? Okay. So Andrew's got a motion to special meeting on the 17th of April at what time? 6:30? 7 o'clock again?
Public hearing. Not a special meeting, a public hearing.
It's part of it.
It's a special meeting that will be a continuance of the public hearing.
Okay.
Here. Hang on one second, sir. We got a motion on the table. So here is for a continuance of the public hearing. At 7, yeah. Okay, do I have a second?
I'll second.
Bertram has a second. Any discussion that's going to work? All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Or, oh, I'm sorry. You're saying it's not going to work? '23rd, but the facility is not going to be large enough. Town hall. Is that okay? If we do it, can you get coverage? Attorney Cronin.
Make a decision.
You sure? Okay. Did we vote on that? I believe we did. Oh, well, just all in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay. So if folks got that, what we will be is back here, in this location, on April 17th, 7 p.m. again. We already have a list of folks who signed up to speak. We'll continue with that list, starting with number 5 is Joanne, and continuing on. If other folks decide they want to speak, or as this woman asked, we certainly will entertain comments through email, through letters, through anything of the sort. Okay, yes sir, you have your hand up for quite a while.
Yeah. We get 35 minutes.
I can't guarantee how much time, but we will certainly endeavor to give you as much time as we possibly can. Yes, we're going to start with the folks who have already signed up. Yes, you're welcome. Does anybody else have? Okay, we're still. Okay, so you just want this to go into the record. Oh, you'll be back. Yep. Okay, and you will be here on the 17th, so you can also speak to that.
Hi guys.
Yes, Ron Parker, PE, Lucas Road. Yep, we'll see you then. Thanks. All right. You're very welcome. Okay. Are there any other? All right. Do I have a theater to adjourn?
This is something to look at for the next couple of weeks.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Is there an email address? Would go to the land use office?
These are extra. Your best bet is to send it directly to the clerk for the commission, which is Sherry Hines, which the address is SHYNES@clintonct.org. Okay?
Butler.